Hey guys, Jeffrey here with AutoAlchemy, and today I'm doing one of my typewriter episodes, and I'll be showing off the INFJ, and in this case, my example INFJ is Frank James, who is a fellow YouTuber. Frank, do you want to say anything about your channel and talk a little bit about your mission as a YouTuber? Maybe that's a little lofty, but
My mission statement.
yeah.
I got into YouTube doing stuff about personality, and I still tend to revolve around that. But I do all kinds of videos and just try to have fun. That's really the central mission of it. I think is to be encouraging, but also be entertaining at the same time.
If anybody hasn't subscribed to Frank's channel and is looking to have knowledge bombs dropped on them, yeah, please subscribe. Smash the subscribe button.
Smash subscribe right now.
All right, awesome. So, like I said before, this is part of my typewriter series where basically I'm trying to see if there's any overlap between typology and then how different writers think about their writing, how they approach it, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So, stripping away the typology stuff for a minute, could you just tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer? How long have you been doing it, and what drew you to writing to begin with?
Yeah, well, I think I started writing, like I was drawn to writing ever since I was a kid, ever since I could write. I remember one of my early memories of writing, I don't know how old I was, 6 or 7. My dad had a typewriter, like an electric typewriter, and I went and started typing up stuff because I was like, man, I can write, I can communicate. And I wrote up, it was like kind of this manifesto that,
Oh man.
but I cringe looking back on it. I cringe at 6-year-old me. It was something stupid like, people should be free like the people of Jamaica, as though the people of Jamaica were the paragon of freedom. I don't
Right.
know. I don't know. I think I just knew I could spell Jamaica, and
You wanted to flex a little bit. I get it.
yeah, no, I was showing off. I was
Yeah.
being showing my intellectual capacities. So I basically have, and then in elementary school, I would write Goosebumps books, my own Goosebumps books. Yeah, I've just always wanted to write. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it was a way of taking all the stuff that was in my head and making it reality in a very detailed way.
Right.
And then in grad school, I ended up studying playwriting and wrote a few plays. And since then, I wrote the first draft of a novel, and I haven't moved past the first draft stage because I'm just like, I've got a few things under my belt, and it's still that stage where it's like, I don't know if I should call myself a writer, even though I've written a bunch of stuff.
Right.
But it doesn't, when you haven't, when you're not constantly writing, it feels a little weird to call yourself a writer,
Yeah.
despite the output that you can claim.
Hmm. So, if I remember correctly, you've actually had some plays produced. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a couple.
Well, hey man, I think that's really awesome. And for me, that would be sufficient to call myself a writer.
Yeah, well, I produced one of them myself, so I think that helps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really like what you said about making your own Goosebumps books. I have a pretty similar story that I haven't talked about yet in the series, I believe. Um, so for me, what I would do really early on, I've been writing in some capacity since I was in the fourth grade or third grade, and initially I was taking all of these different video games that I was playing, and when I was like dissatisfied with the way the story would play out, I would just rewrite my own version of the game.
Oh,
Um, so I did that with a couple of Zelda games and this one really obscure like RPG, Japanese RPG game. And then when I was 10, I was really into the cartoon Digimon. Yeah. And so I ended up like creating a story based on like myself, my brother, my cousins, and I drew like, cartoon versions of each of us and created new monsters. And then I started writing, about our adventures in this digital monstrous landscape. So a little bit different. I never felt I liked the Goosebumps books, but I never felt like I had a handle on existential horror. So that was not my path, but that's cool. I always appreciate it when people have been doing it for that long. I think that it's important to follow that impulse if that's something you've been living with for a while.
Yeah, it is a definite impulse, and
Yeah.
I wonder what exactly it comes from. The desire from a young age to create a different world.
Yeah, I think that part of it is just having it's so fascinating that someone can do that. And at least for me, I kind of had a handle on what my talents were at that point, and it just seemed, right within the realm of what I could do. So it's like this is
Yeah.
something that's super awesome, and yet it's like right at my fingertips. I can conjure up a world all on my own if I want to. Whereas, something like video making, there's like a bigger barrier for entry, but writing, you can get started right away if you have the impulse to do so.
Yeah, that's very true. That pretty much anyone can start writing. All you need is a pencil and a pad.
You said that you've done plays, you have a draft of your novel written. Um, are those sort of the main genres that you've been working in? Have you done any nonfiction or poetry?
I did. I haven't. No, I haven't done nonfiction, but I did poetry, like in high school and a little bit in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can't say any of it was very good. So yeah, I mean, I've liked to dabble in poetry, but um, there's something I don't know. There's something about it where I just always get overly sentimental. You know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Poetry is. I feel like it's a minefield for that kind of thing if you're not careful.
Yeah, you have to be like really good at it to to do it. With a novel, the reader can do a little bit of the work for you with their
Mm.
imagination. With a play, especially if it gets produced, that's the one that has the most leeway actually because the actors, the director, the designers can cover up a lot of your mistakes. But with poetry, it's just like there's nothing anyone else can do for you. It's like you either did it well or you didn't do it
Right.
well.
Yeah. I do a little bit of dabbling myself, and
Oh yeah.
I completely agree. I've made it to the point where I've written a couple of poems that I actually like, but it's never going to be something that I feel completely comfortable with, I don't think. So with your novel, so I also have recently completed a draft of a novel,
Oh
actually
nice.
the second draft of a novel. And for me, I mean, I've been wanting to write a novel for a long time, and I've had a lot of false starts. Probably begun I've begun working on like 5 or 6 novels that never made it past a couple of chapters, and
Yeah.
the way that I had to build up to that is by writing short stories and flash fiction in particular. Like I wanted to try to write something that was good but highly refined and condensed, like a gem, like a 250 word punch to the gut. And
Yeah.
that's how I worked up the muscle, I think, to do my novel. Did you have to do anything like that, or were you able to just jump right into it?
So this particular novel, I had the idea for it. Well, let's see. I started writing it like January or February of 2016, but I had actually gotten the initial kernel of the idea that would become it like in December of 2013. So it took
Hmm.
me 2 years to get to the point of actually starting to write what became the draft. But through that time, I did like you did, and I started probably 3 or 4 different versions of it that never got beyond page 50 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept trying these different approaches, and it would always like peter out because I didn't know. I would just, I don't know, I would not know where to go next. And I
Right.
think what my problem was is that I was focusing too much on plot, and I was thinking too far ahead, and I was trying to make it constantly exciting. And so when I finally started to write what became the thing that I finished, I got myself into a headspace of, this isn't going to be exciting. This isn't going to be plot heavy. It's not going to be a good plot. It's just going to be like, what are the characters doing? And maybe something exciting happens. So I went into it the last time committed to just enjoying where I was in it rather than thinking way down the line and thinking to what the exciting ending would be.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that I heard from Donna Tartt, who wrote The Goldfinch, which won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago.
Mm.
And she said, it might be an apocryphal quote, but I think she said, if you aren't having fun, it's because you're going too fast. So I really took that to heart, because her books, she takes 10 years to write each of her books. So
Right.
I was like, well, maybe I'm just trying to rush through and do too much. And that was true. I needed to just like slow down and enjoy each beat of action as I was writing it, and not worry about trying to create some kind of super intricate plot, because that's my weak spot. Plotting is really difficult.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would say plot is. I really admire people like J.K. Rowling and stuff who write really intricate plot. But the other thing is, they probably don't write it from the beginning. They probably go back and tinker and.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've always been weak at. I don't know. What about you? What do you think are your weak spots?
Oh man. Definitely structure. I wouldn't say plot on its own. I typically have an idea of where I want things to go, and I don't think that. So typically, there's a danger that you have this idea and then you kind of strangle the story to make it conform to that. But I think that I have a pretty good handle on how to manage that delicately, so that I'm approaching this end that I have in mind, but I'm also allowing the story to breathe and take some twists and turns in getting there. And then if it happens to go off the rails completely, then I'll let that happen. But yeah, I don't know. That's not so much an issue for me, but it's just making the whole thing kind of flow as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So like keeping in mind like what sort of I try to think of things in terms of like their functionality. So like what is like the first third of the book accomplishing? How is that sowing the seeds for the second third? And then how does that all work together? So less about the plot and more about the emotional dynamics and making sure that it has that momentum, which I know is in some way tied to the plot, but I think that there's like another element to it of managing readers' expectations. That part I find pretty challenging.
Managing their expectations.
Yeah.
So
And
like, what do you mean? Like anticipating what you think they'll want?
not just that, but anticipating what they're going to predict and being able to give them curveballs that are still consistent with the logic of everything that came before.
Yeah.
And like planting little hints that might be misleading, doing the whole red herring thing, stuff like that is not nearly natural, not as natural to me. But I work around it. I think So that's a big one. And then honestly, I think most of my problems as a writer come outside of the actual act of writing. It's more about like the discipline
Yeah.
and getting myself to sit down. I think this might be a good segue into talking about type because I think of low SI as connecting in some way to being able to do that sensory work of committing yourself to sitting down at a desk and therefore like shutting out other intuitive possibilities for a little while. You're just focused on what's right in front of you. You're trying to put one word after the other, and that is just so hard for me. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you feel like you have? Is there anything in the INFJ profile or in the function combination that you feel shows up in your writing? Like, do your demon functions inhibit you at all?
If anything, maybe I try to overcompensate because a lot of times my writing can become very ST. It's just very like I feel like I have to describe everything because I want to make sure like if I don't describe everything, they're not going to know what this place looks like. They're not going to understand, you
Right.
know. And that's been something that I've had to pull back, you know, trying to explain all the sensory details and then also explain every bit of reasoning for why things happen or why characters do what they do. Because then it becomes too, you know, when you do that constantly, it becomes so granular that it's like not enjoyable to read. So I what I what I try to do is when I read fiction, I pay very close attention to how the author handles that kind of stuff, and I'm always amazed by authors who I'll read something and I'll be like, wait a second, they didn't describe this at all, yet I somehow know exactly where they are and what they're doing and what it looks like, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I brought up Donna Tartt before, but I think she's probably my favorite author. And what I loved about her writing is the ability to zoom in and out along a timeline so that it's like, you know, going in very specifically to events as they unfold in time and then zooming out and just kind of summarizing the next week or month or year and then zooming back in,
Right.
you know, whereas for me that's very difficult for some reason. Like the novel I wrote, I would say is I mean, this is embarrassing, but it's probably like 90% zoomed in and just going like real time along all this stuff that happens. It's difficult for me to like zoom out and just kind of quickly summarize things and focus on the themes and the meanings. And it's weird because you would think it would be the opposite. You would think that given being intuitive dominant that I would struggle to get out of thematic stuff. But
Right.
I don't know, for whatever reason it's like it's story time. Let me let me
Right.
just focus on every individual action that happens. And yeah, so for that's one of the things I struggle with is trusting. I guess it's trusting the reader a little bit more
Yeah.
so that they can come up with the sensory on their own. They don't need to have their hand held. And I guess I don't know if that I don't know where that would come from because I know as a reader I don't need my hand to be held. Maybe it's just as a writer knowing that that's one of my weaknesses in life, being the sensory sort of. I overcompensate for it, or maybe I'm, you know, peacocking and being like, look at how much detail I can
Right.
notice.
Yeah, I was
You know?
actually about to say that.
Yeah, look at how well I can describe the floorboards in this tavern. You
Now you
know.
know what kind of wood it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I have a pretty similar experience. So maybe you can't spell story without st, but for whatever reason, yeah, early on, I really wanted to show people how perceptive I was and how much detail I could cram in, and I found that to be really inhibiting, first of all, and that was probably why I struggled so much to complete a major project,
yeah,
because I don't naturally perceive the world that way, so it's like I have to like really force myself to pay attention and do a ton of research, and it's like you're not exactly playing to your strengths. But once I kind of gave that up, so for a long time I thought that I was an INTP. I think because I
yeah,
was so fixated on the T aspect of it. Like that's like where I really wanted to live. I wanted to be a thinker, and I wanted to be, I don't know, this brilliant person, master of all sensory details and intuitive concepts. And I guess once I kind of like
yeah,
let go of that a little bit and started, once I started suspecting that maybe I was an ENTP, I kind of let some of those personal expectations fall away, and I became a lot more playful with my writing. And that was just really liberating. And I don't know that I would have completed my novel if I hadn't been like more embracing of any kind of playfulness. And it sounds like
yeah.
maybe that there's a parallel there with your story. What do you think? What do you think your strengths are as a writer? And then maybe we can connect that to your type,
My strengths.
your strengths.
Uh, do you have a cricket sound effect that you're playing here? I like to think that I am good at creating characters, uh, and the well, there are certain areas of characters that I think I'm good at. I think I'm also good at creating uh, metaphor and symbolism that isn't always clear, but you kind of know it's there,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So, but I mean, that's what I enjoy doing. And when I read my own writing, that's the thing that makes me go, man, I am good,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think, as far as characters go, I think I'm good at writing some characters, and I mean I have weaknesses in other places. I think one of the issues is it's difficult for me to write characters that are extremely different from me,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe not even extremely different. Maybe it's just like a little different because uh, either characters I write are pretty similar to me or they're very different from me, you know, and I'm aware of that. And one of my theories that might be totally wrong is that when you write any character, that it's an expression of you in some way, even if it's like someone who's totally not you and is like a serial killer, that it's somehow an expression of part of you.
Yeah. I can get behind that completely. So
Yeah,
if it's
so
wrong, we
that's
both go down together, I guess.
it's definitely with characters. It's definitely something I need to work on. But with I feel like when it comes to slipping in metaphorical and symbolic stuff, that I'm pretty good at
Mm-hmm.
that. But overall, I think I still have a long way to go. I never really have thought. I think my writing is good, but I'm not. There's no part where I'm like completely yes, you got it, bro.
Right. Yeah.
No room for improvement.
Well, that's
So
good. I'd be
yeah,
worried
and I mean
otherwise.
yeah. And if you want to, like you said, fit it into type, connected to type somehow, I guess when it comes to that metaphor and stuff, like being able to write have my writing be through that funnel of introverted
Mm-hmm.
intuition, where it's like here's the theme. Now everything has to relate to this.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm good at finding connections of, or, making everything that I'm writing have to go through this theme. Like, that's pretty natural for me.
Yeah. Are there particular themes that you're drawn to?
I think with this book, what I was writing mostly is loneliness and isolation. I was trying to, you did your interview recently with Dave Powers about the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
I was really trying to not write the hero's journey,
Right.
but I sort of did. And now that I'm looking at rewriting this novel, I'm like, I've just got to embrace that. If I want to make this a good novel, I've got to like figure out a way to do the hero's journey in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and it can be, Dave and I didn't really talk about this too much, but I do think that it's helpful to think about the hero's journey at the most abstract level as possible. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar at all with Dan Harmon.
Yeah.
He's a TV writer primarily, but
yeah.
it was through his work that I became aware of Joseph Campbell, actually, and the hero's journey. But he has like a very simplified version. Basically, like, you have your character in a zone of comfort, and then they descend into a zone of discomfort, and then they emerge, somehow transformed, but also somehow the same. And then, beyond that, you get to play with, like, what exactly is transforming, what exactly is changing. And yeah, I find that to be, like, that is, as somebody who doesn't like to be controlled too much and doesn't like to subordinate myself to like one particular overarching vision, that level of resolution is not a straitjacket, so I like it. It's like, okay, here's a very loose framework, and I can kind of plot according to this. So maybe it's helpful to think of it in those terms. And then, I think the rest of the hero's journey stuff is just so embedded into our psyches that even if you're not thinking, well, what's the dragon my character is going to be facing, it's going to manifest regardless.
Yeah. Wait, is Dan Harmon the guy who did Community?
Yeah, he is.
Okay, yeah, then I totally know who that is.
Yeah. And it's funny. So I think that with Community, he said that the only issue with like applying that story circle to television is that instead of like ending somewhere new, like the circle is sort of abbreviated or flattened, like, and then at the end of 30 minutes, everybody is back at square one, and that's just how it is. But anyway, I actually, I'm a big fan of Community, and way back in the day, I wrote a spec script.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, when I was trying to enter the Nickelodeon, like, I don't know what you would call it, but they have like a writing fellowship, and that was what I went with. But alas, that did not work out.
What was your episode about?
It was called Intro to Outros, and I think that there ended up being an episode like this, but basically, Jeff's dad died while they were in the middle of a tiff, and so he kind of had to work through this idea that you don't always get closure, like, oh, okay, dad's dead, and this argument is actually not going to resolve. So it was like a little bit darker, and then so that was one subplot, and then there was another subplot where Abed became aware that he was in the final season of Community, and so he thought that the only way to continue spending time with his friends was to start creating and plotting the next season of Community on his own. So he starts like filming this futuristic, like, it kind of jumps the shark a little bit, where it was, I thought it was actually pretty decent. There were a few cringy parts, but yeah, that's the gist of it.
Nice, that's cool.
Yeah.
What was your favorite episode of Community?
Oh man.
If you can pick.
Yeah, it's been so long. I liked I liked all the paintball ones.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that
They were
too.
just really fun, and really like stylistic and slick.
Yeah.
Uh, God, yeah, it's been so long. I also like the Chaos Theory episode where they're kind of like hopping around different timelines.
Yeah, I think I remember that one.
Yeah. Well, how about you? Besides paintball, I guess.
Oh man, the paintball, you took my answer, man. Because I love the way that one of them ends where it has the guy who played Sawyer in Lost,
Oh my God, yeah,
and he's
yeah,
like, "Whatever, I got Coldplay tickets," and that's and then he walks away.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I also was it a Christmas episode? I always get this song stuck in my head where they were singing "Baby Boomer Santa." Do you remember that
Oh,
one?
I kind of remember it, but not.
Though they were trying to get, I forget all the characters' names now. They were trying to get Chevy Chase to help them out or something. So they sang the song for him. I guess it was a musical episode.
I'm somebody
Oh, and
who.
then also, oh, what was
I
that?
was just gonna say I am somebody who tends to like musical episodes and TV shows.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then and then what's the other song that I always get stuck in my head is where the rap about Vaughn. Um,
Mm.
when he wakes up in the morning, stupid, thinking he was me. He he eats a big poop breakfast with a glass of pee.
Yeah. I like the Jehovah's Witness Christmas rap that Donald Glover does.
I don't know if I remember that one.
Basically, the whole thing is that he's not allowed to celebrate Christmas, but he spends it so that he's like undercover, like covert, spying on Santa Claus, and then he's going to kill him. So he can celebrate Christmas with his friends under the restriction that it ends with him slaying Santa Claus. I am Jehovah's most secret witness. Well,
Wow,
awesome.
we derailed the
Yeah,
conversation.
no, it's good. I'm gonna keep most of this in.
I mean, I think your audience would really greatly benefit from watching
I
Community.
think so too, especially the writers out there. They might learn a
Yeah.
thing or two. Well, cool. Do you feel like you have a pretty good understanding of like how people are going to connect to your work?
I think that I'm pretty aware when I'm writing how the audience is going to feel as they're reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to use that to my advantage to figure out what to do next and like how to, what tone I should be using and, and when I want to be manipulative and have some kind of twist
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that I have, the mood is feeling good and then all of a sudden it feels bad. So I feel like if this is answering the question, I think I'm pretty good at feeling like what a reader would be feeling at the time that they're reading it
Yeah.
and getting them to, having how they feel about certain characters. Like I am fairly aware of where everyone stands. Now I could be sometimes I miss with that because as I was writing the book every week or two, I would send pages to one of my friends to have her read it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time she would be like, yeah, I felt good about this character, blah blah blah, and I would be like, okay, that's what I was expecting. But then
Mm-hmm.
other times she would be like, I really hated this one, and I was like, oh, you're supposed to like this character. So
Yeah.
the thing about writing is that a lot of it is just craft and it's not anything mystical, and you can just have characters say or do certain things and it will make the audience feel one way or another about them.
Right.
And it's not anything obscure. It's just there are certain things that'll make people feel one way, certain things that'll make them feel another way, and it's pretty easy, I think, to pick up on those things.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping for a little more of an esoteric answer, like I wanted the mysticism in there. I wanted you to encourage me to like start sacrificing animals, and but that's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
you have to drink some ayahuasca when you start,
yeah,
and then you will see.
that's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. Well, that's actually a pretty good segue point then into what I think is my final question. Do you have any pointers besides the ayahuasca for a
Right.
young INFJ who's out there with nothing but a pen and a dream?
Well, first you got to get paper.
Yeah,
And
the dream is not enough.
what helped the most for me is just realizing that you are going to want to naturally always think ahead, and you're always going to want to be thinking to the end, and you're going to want to write the end. You know, like you have, or or even just the middle part that's more exciting, or the next chapter that's more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have these amazing parts of the story in your brain, and you're like, I just want to get there.
Yeah,
But you have to learn to feel okay with writing where you are and writing page 45
right.
when you want to be at page 200, you know. And you can't view it as boring and, oh, this is the boring crap I have to slog through to get to the exciting part. Because if you think that, the reader's going to think that.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I try to pace myself a little bit and reward myself a little bit so that I have to like I don't even let myself begin writing anymore unless I find something compelling about the section that I want to work on. So I need to have like I guess you could think of it as a tiny um, a tiny like end goal. Like I'm
Yeah.
forgetting about the book as a whole, and I'm only thinking of this section as a functional unit, and I'm writing towards that like little bit of compelling payoff, and that's it. This is now where my focus is, and it's been pretty helpful for me because I did used to just write the boring stuff and hate my life while doing it.
Yeah.
And obviously, if I'm skipping over it as I'm writing it, there's no reason for someone to read it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes as a writer, you're thinking to yourself, man, I just have to set this up for plot. You know, I just have to describe what this place looks like. I don't really want to. I don't care about it. Well, why do you feel that obligation? You know, it's like,
Hmm.
and if you feel like it has to be something that is explained in order to for something to make sense later, like you said, yeah, you have to look at that thing as its own unit and have fun writing that unit of the story,
Yeah.
and not think that this is subordinate to this later part and not as fun.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it can actually be helpful. Although there are definitely drawbacks to being an intuitive type, I think that having that disposition and being more drawn to thematics can actually help in these scenarios because I don't know, you can kind of like part of the way that I make something compelling to myself is to keep in mind this like hyperlinked nature of what I'm writing, and it's like part of the fun is like infusing something that maybe someone else wouldn't notice right away, but when they read the work as a whole, they'll find like if they reread it, they'll find all of these layers and all of these ways that like later parts are reaching forward somehow through the story, and you know leaving these early seeds that are being sown, and I don't know that's something that I really like as just a natural puzzler.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that you're able to find things that you can really F with, if you will, as you're writing it. Uh, even if like the story itself maybe isn't the most exciting part, you're finding things underneath that you can have fun with.
Yeah, definitely. I find because not everything is going to be exciting. Otherwise, you just fall into that trap of like, and then he got shot by his ex-lover, and that's then you're writing
Yeah.
a soap opera, and you're not writing, well, literature.
Right.
Not that everything has to be hyper literary, but I do tend to be drawn in that direction. I did want to ask you, like, what kind of story are you writing? What is your novel? How much of that do you feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah, it is. It's a fantasy, but it is. I like you just said. I am more drawn toward literary stuff. It's weird. It's like, and it's like a one of those fantasies that's set in kind of a medieval world,
Oh.
but there. I don't know why. There's no magic or anything. Like there's nothing too fantastic about the world itself. So maybe when I go back through and rewrite it, there will be some more supernatural stuff. I think what it is though is fantasy. Well, I guess the one thing that is more fantasy about it is that just the way that the world works is a little bit weirder than the real world is or was. Things are a little bit more implausible. But I think the thing about fantasy is by taking it out of the real world, you remove all of the associations that people have with stuff. Because, like, yeah, theoretically, you could put my story in medieval Europe, but then you're dealing with all these pre-existing things and connections people have with stuff and real world history. So
Yeah.
let me disrespect the history and put it into just my own world with its own history so that I can focus on the themes that I want and not have to deal with other people's associations.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tricky. I think so. Part of what I'm hearing there, and I know that I said that I asked my last question, but hey, I feel like
keep going.
I hit my second wind here. So part of what I'm hearing there is that there's something about the fantastical element that I don't know how to describe it. Maybe I'll just talk about my own experience, and then we can see if anything resonates with you. So even though I like things that are literary, I don't like things that are literary in the sense of this guy worked in an office every day and then he killed himself.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that sort of like, this is the monotony of the modern age. I find that really hard to read, and it's like, yeah, I get that. I think that's been done plenty of times, and I'm done with that. So for me, I guess I'm drawn to, I guess, things like, I think it's called hysterical realism, where you're kind of like living in the real world, but everything is a little bit heightened and a little bit dramatized, or something like what David Foster Wallace does, or Zadie Smith is another writer that I like a lot.
Yeah.
George Saunders, they're also like maybe meta modern. I also like that as a sort of framework for thinking about the writing that I like and the writing that I'm trying to do, where you're still kind of commenting on the perils of contemporary life, but you're doing it in a more playful way, and you're not as restricted by things like historical accuracy, or I don't know. I hate that, like, it has to be completely accurate. I think that now that I've shed that ST impulse, I'd never want to go back to it.
Yeah.
So I want to play in something that's like, it feels a little more like a playground, and I feel like I'm hearing something to that extent from what you're saying about writing this fantasy kind of scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like not wanting to be restricted by things outside of my brain.
Yeah.
Like, so if you were to write, because then it's historical fiction and you're like, oh, I have to do what I have to include sort of what actually happened,
Yeah.
which might not be thematically expedient.
No. I once tried to write this short story that was heavily inspired by Cormac McCarthy, taking place in like the 1800s,
Yeah.
and I just had to do like so much research into like the types of weaponry that were available, and like how exactly do you fire a musket, and
Right.
I mean, I guess I didn't have to do that, but that was sort of the ringer that I happened to put myself through, and that was no good for me as a writer. It took me like a year to complete this 10-page story because I kept dreading it and running away from it.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
You kept having to research and stuff.
Yeah.
Although I will say that I forget who said this, what author said this, but it's something like it's shocking how little research you have to do to, make something passable.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it depends. If you're writing something that is like extremely detailed and reliant on a lot of stuff, yeah. But there are other things. If it's like, what am I trying to say? It's maybe less research than you anticipate.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you've ever listened to the writing podcast. What is it called? Oh gosh, I haven't listened to it in so long. It's a bunch of fantasy guys, and
Oh, is it the one with Brandon Sanderson?
yeah,
What is that called?
writing excuses.
Writing. Yeah, I've listened to a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to a lot as well, and something that always jumped out at me was the idea that if you have something that needs research, it's often better to over explain one really tiny weird thing that really sticks with the reader, and then kind of like just kind of gloss over the other stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do try to do that insofar as I have the opportunity to in my writing.
Yeah, that's a good bit of advice because it kind of gives the impression that you know more than you do. So so the audience is willing to forgive other stuff.
Yeah, it's like it's like a little show of your muscle, and then there's like this implied threat, like, but don't make me over explain the rest because I'm so good at it. I'm really good at it.
I told you how I loaded a musket. Don't make me tell you how I did all this other stuff.
Don't let me tell you about proper horse care.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I meant to ask you if you use MBTI as like a tool for thinking about characters.
Well, that's an interesting thing because I never really have until recently. Most of the learning I've done about Myers-Briggs and all that personality stuff, learning through objective personality, being in that class, wasn't until this year. And I think actually the most helpful thing, and I may make a video about this at some point, I think it's too much if you try to make characters using all the parts, like the 16 types.
Yeah.
But what I think could be really helpful for making characters is to just look at the 4 temperaments, IP, EJ, IJ, EP.
Yeah.
And just to have that awareness. And then maybe, in the OP method to also use like the modalities and stuff, to have people who are double masculine, double feminine, all that. But just starting with the 4 temperaments, I think, is very helpful for making characters because it's an easy way to split people up, and then maybe to use the letters, SF, NT, all that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's probably a sweet spot, right? Like if you get too specific, then I think you might run the danger of like overlooking the fact that everybody does everything, and then you'll start to like pigeonhole the character. But yeah, I think it could be helpful. I've never thought about using the whole OP method, but I think that would actually be pretty, especially the modalities, I think opens things up for characters.
Yeah, and I think it's too specific, like you said. If you were to go in there and say all right, this character is, an INTP, and then you're trying to be like, okay, how does he use introverted thinking first? That's just way too much, and
Yeah.
it's better to just be like, okay, this person's an IP, or maybe you could say, okay, this person's lead TI, and
Right.
then and just use that as like a sketch. Maybe for your main character or a couple main characters, you have it fully fleshed out. But for most characters, you don't need all that. But it's good be to give more realism to minor characters, especially to be like, okay,
Yeah.
this person is an EP, so they're gonna want to overgather and they're gonna freak out about being controlled.
Yeah, they're a chaos monkey.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
start there, and then they'll develop themselves. Like that's the thing. I don't know how you feel about characters, but for me, they tend to like start to write themselves pretty quickly. Like you have to set a few
Hmm.
guidelines for them and say, okay, they do this, they talk like this. Let's see what they do.
Yeah, like any real human being, there are going to be things that are like steady, observable traits, but
Yeah,
there's always like that organic process that you can't really control. I definitely find that to be true.
yeah, and so using a little bit of personality typing can be a helpful way to set a parameter for them, and then see where they go from there rather than trying to over control.
Yeah.
Because I think over can, as much as I like control, I set up parameters for all of my characters and stuff, but I set up rules for them to follow,
Hmm.
but I don't think you need to micromanage them, I guess is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it just slows you down.
Hmm. Yeah, to have to always revisit the rule book and make sure that you're building these logical machines. That doesn't, yeah.
Yeah. But it can be very powerful. Maybe that's something you do on a later draft. You'd be like, okay, now I'm really gonna focus on this character being, inferior extroverted sensing, like something like that. Or
Yeah.
I'm really gonna focus on this character being a crazy EJ. You know?
Yeah, I think that it could be helpful on a second draft because, well, it gives you kind of like a framework for how they might grow.
Yeah.
Sometimes like the external plot has to, I think anyway, somehow come with like internal development as well, and then you can kind of like double check that they're growing in the areas that you want them to grow for the plot, or that would make the most sense for them to grow. Did that make sense? Let's hope so.
Yeah, I think so.
Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Well, and the other thing, it reminded me of something I heard in one of your other writing videos about. I think you said this, that imagine that the writing Nazis are coming to the door.
Yeah.
So yeah, for the first draft, you don't want to write something that's really good, and if you're thinking too much about the intricacies of a character on the first draft, you're never gonna finish. So yeah, so like we've said, second draft, that's when you might want to really bring in personality stuff.
Yeah. Actually, that I'm pretty sure that's a Dan Harmon quote that I stole.
Oh
So
yeah,
so we've brought it full circle. Full
yeah.
hero's journey.
Yeah, and while we're talking about it, I haven't done much Enneagram stuff, but the Enneagram can also be helpful with characters because
Mm,
that has less fewer moving parts. It's
yeah.
like you are this type, go. Whereas in Myers Briggs, it's a little bit more. You have more things to keep in your brain, so.
Yeah.
I think personality can be very helpful. Personality typing, whatever
Yeah.
system you use to create characters, to set up like a quick template You know, it's like you have these pre-made templates and you throw them in there and then you can develop it from there.
Do you have any other kinds of tools or models that you like to use whenever you're writing?
Uh,
Like, do you have any plot method, or do you just
yeah,
go
well,
for it?
usually I don't have like a set method, but I usually go into stuff with another work in mind, and then I steal from other places, you know? So
Yeah.
I will have an ending in mind from another book, and I will just be like, I want to steal this ending, and I want to structure my book like this other book, and I'll just do that. Or I'll be like, there is this plot twist in this one book that I thought was really good, so I want to steal it. And when I
Yeah.
say steal, you know, I just mean like I want to analyze it. What is the structure here? What did they do on a more abstract level? And then I'll just do the same exact thing, but plug in my story. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's awesome, and I think that everybody should do that.
Yeah, because
When I was
you're
when I
do.
was younger,
Oh,
I
go
had a
ahead.
little bit of when I was younger, I had a little bit of an individualistic bent, and I really wanted to avoid doing things like that.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, I mean, there's a reason that it works. You can't reinvent the wheel every single time. Anyway, didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about
No, no,
that.
no. I was just gonna develop it. Like you're stealing whether you are aware of it or not.
Yeah.
You know, you're never gonna come up with something totally original. So you might as well find something that you know works and steal it consciously.
Right. Yeah. Every successful bank heist probably had a plan,
Yeah.
and it's something to keep in mind.
Well, and then the other thing is like even when you think you're being totally original, you're not. Like for instance, you brought up writing excuses. I remember one episode they were talking about man, every fantasy novel starts off with like the character, you know, some girl in a field or something picking flowers. And I was like, gosh darn it, that's how mine starts. And like I wasn't stealing it consciously. I was just like, huh, how can I start this? Okay, it's peaceful, we're in a field. It wasn't exactly what they said, but it was pretty darn close.
Right.
And I was like, so there are just these things that are like, I don't know, stories that are deeply embedded into you because of all the movies and all the books and all the stories that you've ingested over the years, that everyone is like, a story should start off with things being peaceful. How do we do this? Okay,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
you're here in a field. So it's better to be aware and steal consciously than to just be like, I'm doing my own thing, and then end up being like everyone else without realizing it.
Did I hear two type Timmy in there somewhere?
Yeah, I'm two type Timmy. Check me out.
I think I'll have to set up an interview with him as well at some point. I hear that he's a very accomplished writer.
Yeah, yeah. He writes in two genres at once.
Yeah, it's a psychological thriller, but it's also
Chick lit.
yeah, yeah. That's perfect. That's a good juxtaposition. Well, man, I think that's all I've got for you. So, thank you so much for coming onto the channel and for sharing the inside scoop.
Well, it was a lot of fun, Jeffrey. Thanks very much. I hope
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
be on your channel as a guest again soon.
I'll keep you in mind. After I book two type Timmy, we'll talk.
Okay. All right, I understand.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in. If you enjoyed our conversation and would like to see more conversations like this, please like and subscribe. That's all I've got. So I'll talk to you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.